In the heart of the endless desert, beneath a burning sapphire sky, a lone figure stumbled across the dunes. His feet left no imprint, as if the earth itself refused to remember him. This was the sand dancer, a man of 35, lean and sun-worn, clothed in faded desert robes, with a sash of crimson knotted at his waist. His eyes, deep-set and hollow, stared into the golden abyss. He had danced once for kings and crowds. Now he wandered nameless, chasing a mirage that bore the shape of a woman's face and the sound of laughter lost to time. The air shimmered with heat and memory. Suddenly a gust stirred the sands into brief illusions, half-formed memories teasing the edges of his sanity. He paused atop a high dune. A wind chime echoed, though there was no wind, and from below, a child's voice whispered, "Why do you dance alone?" He closed his eyes. The voice was gone, but the ache in his chest remained. It was time to keep walking. As the sun lowered toward the western edge of the sky, the sand dancer reached a cliff of stone rising from the sand like a broken tooth. There he found shelter beneath its shade, his shadow curling beside him like an exhausted companion. He knelt and drew symbols into the sand, old dancers' sigils from a forgotten school. Each curve carried memories of joy, loss, rhythm, and silence. In the silence, the sand hummed. He remembered the music, not the kind played with instruments, but the kind that lived in breath and motion. His fingers traced one final sigil, hope. It was the only one that did not blur in the wind. "She always said the desert listened," he whispered. He stared out toward the horizon where the sky burned orange and magenta. And for a moment he thought he heard ankle bells ringing faintly, though the only movement came from his own fingers brushing the sand. Nightfall came quickly. Stars pierced the sky like memory fragments. The sand dancer sat by a small fire of desert twigs, the flames no higher than his palm. Shadows danced along the cliff walls, echoing his former performances. He raised his hand, slowly forming gestures of the oldest dance, a ritual of invocation, not entertainment. Each movement was deliberate, imbued with the weight of longing. His silhouette flickered against the stone behind him. "If you see me," he murmured into the fire, "know that I never stopped dancing." The fire cracked in reply. From the darkness beyond its reach, a faint shimmer of light moved. Unexplained, soft, not threatening. He did not rise. He only watched. In the quiet, the desert breathed, and so did he. In dreams, the desert transformed. It became a grand coliseum of sand and flame, with thousands of faceless spectators seated upon dunes that breathed. The sand dancer stood alone on the central platform, barefoot robes whipping in invisible wind. Music rang. Sweet, strange, sacred. He danced. Not to impress, not to mourn, but to remember. The rhythm unlocked doors within him. Her voice, her laughter, her final breath. The sand beneath his feet glowed faintly with each step. As he turned, arms wide, he saw her at the arena's edge, a woman in white face hidden by shadow. He reached, mid-spin, and awoke, gasping. Alone. Moonlight now blanketed the real desert, but the echoes of that music still rang in his ears. Dawn broke not with color, but with silence. The sand dancer stood atop a dune, the cold morning wind tugging gently at his robe. He had not slept after the dream. His face was calm now, resolved. The horizon glowed faintly. He removed his sandals and stepped barefoot onto the chilled sand. Slowly, solemnly, he began to dance. Each movement was slow, deliberate, like a prayer. His hands sliced the air with practiced grace, his body flowing like wind over dunes. The dance was not for the world, it was for what remained within. For forgiveness. For remembrance. As the sun finally breached the horizon, golden light bathed him. A new day had begun. But the journey was far from over. The sand dancer found a weathered ruin half buried in the sand, arched columns broken, the remnants of an ancient monastery lost to time. Its silence screamed louder than the desert winds. Within the crumbled walls he uncovered a shallow bowl carved from obsidian, filled with wind-blown ash. He knelt before it, as if in prayer. This was her temple, he whispered. Memories crashed over him, her hands lighting incense, the way her voice echoed off stone when she sang sacred verses. A gust of wind carried fragments of her song through the broken hall. He closed his eyes. Regret tasted like dust. He reached for the ash and smeared it across his brow, a penance born of longing. The sun passed behind a cloud. Shadows shifted. For a moment, he thought he saw her standing in the corridor, backlit by light. But as he turned, the image crumbled like the walls around him. Still, he whispered, I remember. He wandered deeper into the ruins, past broken statues and fractured prayer stones, until he reached a chamber carved into the rock. Its walls bore etched memories, scripts of forgotten vows and painted images worn to ghostly outlines. There, among the crumbled relics, lay her anklet, delicate and rusted, half buried beneath the sand. He bent down slowly, brushing it free, heart pounding as if he had unearthed her soul. The tiny bells no longer chimed, but he could still hear their music in his memory. You danced with more truth than I ever could, he murmured. Holding the anklet close, he pressed it to his chest. The air grew still. Even the desert held its breath. A drop of water fell from the stone above. He looked up, startled. Was it rain? A tear? Or a crack in memory? The chamber remained silent. But in his chest, something cracked open. That night, he lit no fire. The cold bit deeper, but he welcomed it. He sat in silence beside the ruins, gazing at the stars, letting them pierce through his guilt like tiny needles of light. He laid the anklet before him in the sand, encircling it with lines drawn by his finger, symbols of grief, remembrance, love. He whispered, Forgive me. His voice cracked. There had been a moment, long ago, when she had begged him not to leave for the palace, to stay and dance for the forgotten instead of kings. He had gone anyway. She had died alone. That truth lived in every step he took now. A jackal cried in the distance. The desert's breath grew colder. And yet, for the first time, he did not feel entirely alone. Perhaps in acknowledging his failure, he had stepped onto the true path. The stars above did not blink. They watched. Before dawn, the sand dancer returned to the altar and performed a dance of mourning. There was no rhythm, no music, only breath and movement. His arms swept the air like wings folding over pain. His feet kissed the sand without sound. He moved not as a performer, but as one pleading for forgiveness from something beyond. The rising light cast long shadows across the crumbling stones. With each turn, he shed fragments of guilt, each motion dissolving an unspoken memory. When he finally stopped, he fell to his knees, chest heaving, sweat mingling with tears. The silence returned, but it was softer now, not accusatory. He picked up the anklet and tied it to his sash. Not as a keepsake, but as a vow. The dead cannot return, but the living can change. And sometimes dance can speak when words fail. He left the ruins just as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sands with the colors of fire and memory. As he walked, he did not look back. There was no need to. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer held him hostage. Each footstep now touched the ground, real, firm, and deliberate. For the first time in years, the sand accepted him. Footprints trailed behind him, fragile yet undeniable. With the anklet tied to his sash, he moved like a man carrying not weight, but meaning. His shadow stretched long across the golden dunes. The desert seemed to open before him, not as a punishment, but as a path. Wind whispered through the dunes like a benediction. And though no music played, his heart began to beat in rhythm again. Not for kings. Not for ghosts, but for what lay ahead. The dunes grew steeper, more treacherous, as if resisting his passage. The sand dancer climbed one after another, breath ragged, legs trembling. Above him, vultures circled lazily, watchers of those who fell. He stopped at a jagged ridge where a half-buried statue of a deity lay shattered. Its eyes, though cracked, seemed to gaze through him. "You judged us," he whispered, "but we forgot you." He placed his palm against the cold stone. A storm brewed in the distance, gray clouds thick with fury. He stared into it without flinching. Doubt gnawed at his soul. Had anything he'd done meant anything at all? Was he dancing only to escape guilt, not confront it? The desert did not answer. But it did offer a test. A wind rose sharp with sand. He wrapped his robe tighter, turned away from the storm's edge, and descended into the next valley. Alone again, with his silence. At dusk, he entered a canyon carved by centuries of wind, the walls towering like sentinels. The rocks whispered old truths, carried on echoes that weren't his. The narrow passage seemed endless, and with each step, his mind fractured. He saw flashes, his childhood home, his first performance, her smile beneath candlelight, all playing on the canyon walls like fading shadows. He paused, breath stolen by the weight of remembrance. "Why do I still carry you all?" he murmured, tracing his fingers along the rock. In the center of the path, a pool of still water reflected not him, but a younger self, ambitious, proud, unaware of what he'd leave behind. He reached toward the reflection, but it scattered into ripples. The younger self vanished. Just an echo. Just a ghost. He closed his eyes, leaned back against the stone, and wept without sound. The canyon opened into a basin filled with skeletal trees, dead but still standing, like mourners frozen mid-prayer. The sand dancer moved among them with reverence, brushing fingers along dry bark. He imagined the trees as people he'd known, some kind, some forgotten, some betrayed. The wind was silent here, and his own breath felt intrusive. He stopped at the center and began to dance. Not for them, but to purge the anguish that filled him. Each movement was raw, stripped of form. He fell. He rose. He collapsed again. When he finally stood still, sweat clung to him like grief. The silence remained. But something within had cracked open, a space where forgiveness might one day grow. Above, the moon emerged, casting pale silver across the graveyard of trees. He awoke beneath one of the trees, cold and sore. The dawn mist curled like breath above the sand. Something felt different. The voice in his head, the one that scorned, doubted, accused, had quieted. Not vanished, but softened. As if witnessing his pain, it too had wept. He stood slowly, and found a black feather at his feet. It was not from the vultures. It shimmered faintly, iridescent. He turned it in his hand and thought, "Perhaps I am being watched. Not by gods, not by spirits, but by his better self, the one he'd left behind in his pursuit of acclaim." He tucked the feather into his sash. As he walked away, he left the skeletal trees behind like past versions of himself, still, distant, no longer threatening. The desert greeted him with a hush that no longer felt empty, but open. Later that day, he reached a place unlike any he had seen. A circle of stones etched with ancient marks, perfectly preserved, untouched by sand or time. In the center stood a mirror, not glass but polished obsidian. It showed not the man he was, but the man he could become. Worn, wise, clear of guilt. He stepped forward, hesitant, heart trembling. "Is this who I was meant to be?" he asked aloud. No answer came, but the wind stirred. He raised his arms slowly, then let them fall. No performance. No memory. Just breath. Just presence. The mirror held his gaze, unjudging. He bowed his head and turned away, not in shame, but in reverence. As he walked from the circle, the mirror rippled, as if breathing. He did not look back. He no longer needed to. By midday, the sand dancer reached a basin encircled by tall cliffs that formed a perfect amphitheater of stone and silence. The wind ceased here. No birds cried. No insects stirred. It was as if sound had never existed in this place. At its center lay a stone dais, flat, uncarved, smooth as glass. He stepped upon it with reverence, and the moment his feet touched its surface, an unseen vibration passed through him, not loud, but deep, like a bell struck inside the soul. He stood still, expecting vision or voice. But none came. Only stillness. He raised his arms and moved slowly, one breath per gesture. It was not a dance of form or grace but a ritual of surrender. He let his ego fall away piece by piece, each motion peeling it back. Sweat beaded on his brow. His hands trembled. But he did not stop. The silence welcomed it all. Hours passed. Shadows shifted. He sat cross-legged at the center of the dais, breath calm, body still. Then it happened. The stone beneath him warmed, not from the sun, but from within. Before him, the air shimmered. Slowly, silently, a figure emerged from nothingness. It was him, but younger, prouder, full of hunger and fire. The illusion stared at him with narrowed eyes. You abandoned everything, it said, not aloud, but into his mind. The sand dancer did not speak. You traded greatness for ghosts, it accused. Still, he said nothing. The illusion stepped closer, mirroring every breath. Who are you now? It whispered. He looked into his own eyes, then said softly, I am the one who stayed. The illusion flickered, staggered, and began to fade. But the weight it had carried remained. He stood, and the illusion was gone. But now, a second figure emerged. Her. She walked barefoot across the dais, robes white and windless, face clear and radiant. She did not speak. She only watched him. He lowered his head. I failed you, he said. I chased light and lost the source. She remained silent. He stepped forward, trembling. If I could take it back. His voice broke. Her gaze remained soft. Then she lifted her hand and placed it over his chest, not with judgment, but with peace. In that touch, all the guilt melted like morning frost. Her form dissolved into golden light, lifting upward, leaving warmth behind. He dropped to his knees, not from sorrow but from release. A lifetime of burden vanished in a breath. He wept. This time, it was not from pain, but from grace. The light faded, and the dais became only stone again. But he felt different, lighter, clearer. He lay back and watched the sky, which had turned a deep indigo, though the sun still shone. A great calm settled over him. He had faced the mirror. He had spoken with his shadow. He had held her hand again, if only in spirit. In the quiet, a single line formed in his mind. No voice, just presence. You are not what you've done. You are what you choose now. He sat up slowly. The wind returned, gentle, cool, and honest. The amphitheater had served its purpose. He stood and left it behind. As he walked, he passed his footprints, dozens, all leading to the dais. Not one turned back. He smiled. For the first time it reached his eyes. Beyond the amphitheater, he found a ridge overlooking the open desert, unending, luminous, alive. The setting sun spilled molten gold across the dunes. He stood barefoot on the edge, and this time he danced not for the past, not for the gods, not for guilt. He danced for now. The wind caught his motion and answered with song. Each step honored what had been and what might yet come. His body moved with clarity, no wasted gesture, no hidden ache. It was joy, not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, truthful, like water finally flowing after drought. As the last light touched his skin, he raised his arms high and bowed, not to anyone, but to the desert, the journey, and the self that had endured. The dance ended. The wind bowed back. He came upon a place where the sand gave way to stone, flat, cracked, scorched black by ancient fire. The wind died. No footprints marked the terrain. It was known in legend as the Hollow, where even the stars dared not look down. Here, no echoes returned. The sand dancer stepped lightly into its center, surrounded by jagged monoliths. They pulsed faintly as if alive. This was not a place of memory, it was a void. Ego dissolved here. Identity unraveled. He knelt in the center, breath slowing, and placed both palms against the earth. I am not name, not title, not form, he whispered. I am only awareness. A silence followed, not emptiness, but depth without floor. His mind flickered, memories faded, desires fell away. All that remained was presence. The hollow accepted him, not with fury, but with truth. He lay back on the stone floor and let himself vanish. Not die, but dissolve. His thoughts slowed to a crawl, then to silence. He no longer reached for anything, not meaning, not memory, only stillness. And in that stillness, something stirred. A warmth, barely a flicker, deep inside the emptiness. It did not speak, nor shine, but it existed. A presence without voice or shape. He opened his eyes and saw only sky, still, starless, but no longer cold. He was not alone. Not truly. Within him, a faint ember had awakened. The self that needed nothing. That craved no applause, no redemption. The dancer before the dance. The being before the name. He did not smile. He did not cry. He simply breathed. And the hollow breathed with him. The silence broke. Not with sound, but with movement. A wind rose, sudden and sharp, circling the hollow like a serpent. Sand lifted in spirals forming shapes, visions, not real but tests. Faces appeared, the ones he had betrayed, the ones who had praised him, the man he once thought he was. Each form asked the same unspoken question. Will you cling to me? But he remained still. Let them swirl. Let them dissolve. The storm danced, fierce and taunting. His robes flared. Dust blinded him. Yet he stood. Each step he took through the storm was weightless. Not resistance, not denial, just presence. When the wind ceased, he stood alone again. The hollow was gone. Behind him, silence. Ahead, sky. Blue dot. Opened, white wall. A live dead one. Out of the hollow, he found the desert transformed. Where once it had punished, now it embraced. The light was gentler, the dunes soft and rolling. A single tree stood in the distance, green, impossibly alive. He approached, heart steady, step calm. Beneath its shade, he found a spring, clear water pooling over polished stone. He knelt and drank. It tasted of nothing, and everything. Life, loss, longing, peace. He cupped it again, and poured it over his head. The coolness ran down his face like grace itself. He laughed, not from joy, but release. A sound that belonged not to the past or future, but to now. He stood beneath the tree and looked upward through the branches. The sky shimmered, not as a vision, but as truth. He was still him. And yet, he was no longer bound. He danced once more, but not alone. The wind danced with him. The tree rustled in rhythm. The spring sparkled in time. It was a dance without audience, without steps, pure improvisation guided by breath and being. His body moved not for performance, but for presence. His feet traced no pattern, yet the sand shaped itself around them. The anklet at his sash chimed softly with each motion, no longer a relic of guilt, but a bell of remembrance. Time lost meaning. He danced until the sun stood high. Then he stopped, standing tall, chest open to the sky. His journey had not ended. It had begun anew. He was no longer the sand dancer of the palace, nor the one of grief. He was now simply the dancer of the moment. And that was enough. The sand dancer traveled eastward now, toward no destination but with a steady rhythm in his steps. The desert had softened. No longer hostile, it breathed with him. He walked lightly, no longer haunted by echoes. Each dune greeted him like a friend. Birds flew above, silent companions tracing his shadow. He found himself humming an old melody, not from memory, but from the present. As he crested a tall rise, the view opened, an endless sea of light and curve, dune after dune, like a great golden tide. He exhaled slowly. This was not the end of the journey, but the space between. The space where understanding settles, not as thought, but as knowing. He closed his eyes, stood still, and let the sun warm his face. There was nothing to run from, and nothing to reach for. Only now. Only breath. And that was enough. He descended into a valley of soft dunes, where the wind shaped sand into delicate patterns, spirals, waves, concentric circles. Here, the desert felt like breath made visible. He knelt and traced the curves with his fingertips, watching the grains shift like silk. He realized something simple. The desert had always danced. He had simply never listened. He stood and joined the wind in motion, his arms imitating its sweep, his feet mirroring its hush. There was no need for thought. Only sensation. Only presence. The air turned warm and fragrant, carrying scents of myrrh and ancient wood. No vision appeared. No voice guided him. Yet clarity came like sunrise. Slow, certain, inevitable. He was not performing. He was being. The world had become his partner, not his audience. At midday, the heat rose, but he no longer fought it. He found shade under a sandstone arch and rested, body curled in a gentle fold. Dreams came, not memories, but clear visions. He saw himself in many lives, farmer, soldier, teacher, beggar, all dancing in different ways. Movement was the thread that ran through them all. It was the one truth he had carried across time. When he awoke, he did not feel lost. He felt rooted, as if he had always been part of something vaster. He stepped out from the arch, stretched and laughed softly. Not because something was funny, but because silence no longer frightened him. The dance had moved inside him. Even stillness was part of the rhythm now. The desert shimmered. And for once, it did not feel endless. It felt full. He found a herd of wild camels at a spring, gentle creatures who did not shy from him. One approached, nose brushing his palm. He laughed again, bowing slightly. It was the first living soul he had touched in months. Connection without words. Trust without history. He sat among them as they drank, resting his back against a rock. One by one, they circled around him in slow, deliberate motion, like dancers in meditation. He watched the rhythm of their breath, the way their legs moved in unison, the calm they radiated. It reminded him that life, true life, was not loud or heroic. It was rhythm. Sustained. Gentle. Honest. He did not perform for them. He simply sat. And they accepted him. Not as dancer. Not as sinner. Just as presence. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, he stood once more on a dune's crest. Behind him, silence, memory, the storm of self. Ahead, more desert, perhaps more trials, but none of it heavy now. He had changed not the desert, but the way he walked through it. He began to dance, not for closure, but continuation. His form moved in perfect harmony with the wind, with the dying light, with the stillness that no longer felt empty. His shadow stretched across the dunes like a flowing river. For a moment, the desert seemed to pause, watching. And as the first stars emerged above, the sand dancer lifted his arms and whispered, "I am still dancing." No applause followed. Only the quiet beat of his heart, the pulse of the sand, and the truth of being. That was all. And it was beautiful. The final stretch of desert was quiet, neither challenging nor welcoming. It simply was. The sand dancer walked without destination, his pace steady, breath in rhythm with the earth beneath him. He carried no pack, no need for maps or markers. Each step was a choice, and each choice was peace. The sky stretched wide above, cloudless, open. As he walked, he noticed a trail of antelope tracks beside his own, fresh and fleeting. He smiled. Life moved in many forms, each with its own dance. He followed their prints briefly, not to hunt or chase, but to walk in kinship. The footprints diverged, and he let them go. He understood now. The path is not the point. Presence is. He continued forward, not as a seeker, but as one who had already arrived. He arrived at a high plateau as twilight gathered. From its edge, the world unfurled below. Valleys of sand, winding trails, distant silhouettes of stone temples and oses, all cloaked in golden pink dusk. He stood still, letting the sight imprint into him. It was not awe he felt, but calm. The world did not need him to dance. And yet, he did. Slowly, subtly, he moved. Each gesture matched the shape of the land, the curve of a dune, the bend of a horizon. His body mirrored the earth itself, and with that motion he bowed, not in reverence but in harmony. The dance was no longer something he did. It was something he had become. And the plateau held him, unmoving, unwavering, like the final note of a sacred song sustained beyond sound. Night arrived soft and deep. He sat beside a small circle of stones, hands resting open on his knees. The stars blinked awake one by one, and the moon rose, clear and silver, casting his shadow in full. He gazed up without expectation. There was no epiphany, no final message. Just space, just breath. And that was enough. A cool breeze passed, and he lifted his hand instinctively. Not to perform, just to feel. The anklet at his sash shimmered in the moonlight, chiming once. A memory, not a weight. He whispered, "I remember." Then he closed his eyes. The desert hummed a lullaby around him, made of sand, sky, and silence. He had no name to speak. He needed none. He had become the moment, and the moment was complete. In a dream, he danced among stars. Not beneath them, among them. Each step left trails of light, each movement wove constellations into form. There were no watches, only presence. Time dissolved. He danced with all versions of himself, the proud, the broken, the silent, the reborn. They moved together, perfectly in sync, spiraling through the cosmos as one being. He was not the sand dancer. He was the dance. Infinite, effortless, luminous. When he awoke, the stars still sparkled above, and he remained at peace. He smiled, hand resting on his heart. That dream had not been fantasy. It had been memory, from a place deeper than life. A place where nothing is lost, and all is rhythm. At dawn, he stood again on the sand, still and smiling. The light was soft, not blinding. A breeze played with his robes, and far off, a single bird cried. He looked out across the horizon, and took one final step forward. Not toward anything. Not away. Just one more step in rhythm. The desert no longer felt endless. It felt whole. Behind him, the wind erased his footprints. But the dance remained. Not as memory, as presence. And in the final light, the narrator's voice returns. Not above, but within. He walked the desert not to escape the world, but to become it. Not to leave the past, but to bless it with silence. And when no one watched, he danced. And the world turned in time with his breath.